You know when you watch a film and you can see all the ingredients of a great movie are there, but for some reason it just doesn't come together? That's Saltburn for me. In many ways, the movie has been a massive success. It's had a wide cultural impact, the acting is great, the cinematography is great, the music is great, the editing is great, the premise is interesting, it's never boring, and there are creative flourishes that are genuinely impressive. The only problem is that the movie overall sort of doesn't really make any sense. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And from what I can tell, the problems mostly stem from the script, as what's consistently lacking or confused throughout is the main character's motivation. Why is he doing any of this? And it's not like we aren't told his motivation by the end, but the evidence for that alleged motivation doesn't really line up, making it feel contrived, confused, and unsatisfying, despite having an engaging story with pretty iconic moments. Now for many people, they'll say the film is just an entertaining watch. If you enjoyed it, then it doesn't matter if it's perfectly logical or not. But in the same way many of you may have noticed the typo I just flashed on screen, once you see something blatantly wrong, it's hard to ignore it. And it frustrates me, because I do still like this movie. Even the gross out scenes that are all anyone talks about, I admire those kind of bold creative moves that attract attention. But it could have been so much more. So let's take a deeper look at what doesn't work in Saltburn and what could have been changed to make the story more coherent. The first thing I want to establish is the concept of killing your darlings. When you're writing a script, sometimes you get really invested in a certain scene or a certain line of dialogue or a certain plot twist. You get so attached to it that you believe it's essential to your story, and subconsciously start structuring key parts of your script around this darling moment in order to justify its existence, as no matter what, this has to happen. But once other people start reading your script, they experience what you've written as a whole, the plot, the message, the character arcs, and sometimes the one thing that seems out of place to them is this darling moment of yours. As if the story is going one way, and then you veer off course illogically to this darling, before returning back to the story's natural infrastructure. Therefore, not always, but often, a mature writer needs to be willing to kill their darlings for the greater good of the overall story. Saltburn is filled with memorable darling moments. The bathtub scene, the vampire scene, the meet the parents scene, the grave scene, and the final dance scene. There are many good moments in between these scenes too, but these are the biggest statements the movie makes. The problem is that the character's motivation in each of these scenes doesn't line up with the next, which creates narrative friction in the viewer's mind. This is because writer-director Emerald Fennell wants to have her cake and eat it. She wants to write a full movie where her main character's motivation appears to be that he was in love with Felix, and then blow our minds with a twist that it was actually all about him scheming to steal the family's castle. She opens the movie with a red herring of a monologue that makes it sound like Oliver is secretly in love with Felix and struggling to accept it himself. Saying he wasn't in love with him, but closing with, I loved him, but was I in love with him? As if the key question of the movie for the audience to carry forward was whether or not it was platonic love or romantic love. We then get introduced to Oliver in university being studious and intelligent, but a social outcast, and he longingly watches Felix being so popular and adored. This whole section of the movie is really well directed. It flows pretty perfectly and seems as if the protagonist's motivation is making well-to-do friends and being socially accepted, despite coming from a tragically poor background. He forms a connection with Felix, who brings him into his fold even if he doesn't belong, and Oliver now starts loving Felix as he associates him with the loving feeling of being socially accepted. All making sense so far. After Oliver's father dies, Felix invites him to Saltburn for the summer, and he gets to experience an insanely privileged lifestyle of living in a castle with his bizarre family. And this is where the story goes off the rails and loses the run of itself. If we look at the he loves Felix motivation, it only makes sense for the bathtub scene, the meet the parents scene, and the grave scene. As physically and emotionally, we can see that he'll do anything to be closer to him. So if you cut the other two, the story could make more sense. Although, If the real story was just that he was obsessively in love with Felix, it would actually be more logical that Oliver starts killing off the other family members so he can have more time alone with Felix, as he doesn't want to share him with anyone else. Then, as a cruel consequence of all of his selfish decisions, Felix could either die by mistake or perhaps take his own life. This would then fully justify ending the movie with the darling grave scene. But if we look at the conflicting he wants to steal the house motivation, then of these 5 darlings, you can keep the vampire scene, as he could be trying to marry his way into wealth, and of course you get to keep the final dance scene, as he's celebrating his psychopathic plans coming to fruition. You could also just about keep the meet the parents scene, as if he's been lying to Felix to take advantage of him. So we have 2 darlings that go one way, 2 that go a complete other direction, and 1 that could play either way. And the meet the parents scene is a fantastic darling. The smash cut to Felix's smile after he discovers Oliver was lying about everything is my favourite moment of the movie. However, this scene, this creative decision, ironically enough, is what undermines and confuses everything that comes before and after it. It only establishes what Oliver isn't. He isn't poor, he's from a normal middle-class family, and he isn't traumatised from neglectful parents who are addicted to drugs or dead. But it doesn't replace his backstory with more information that the audience can use to understand what comes next. This leads to more questions than answers. If he's from a normal background and is just a bit of a lone wolf, then why is he so obsessed with being socially accepted? Why does he need to be wealthy so badly if he's never had any real major financial stress? This character motivation would make sense if he was from a broken, impoverished background. But because we had the darling moment of uncovering the truth in front of Felix, now that doesn't apply anymore. With the best writing, characters have an external want and an internal need. What is it they want, and what emotional need will be fulfilled if that desire is accomplished? But Fennell never gives us a replacement backstory of any value that justifies her protagonist's shifting goals. She later undermines the idea that he ever even loved Felix when the closing monologue continues, "I loved him, but sometimes I hated him. I hated him. Yeah, I hated him. I hated all of you. And you made it so easy." As if the whole scheme was always about the house from the beginning. But if it was just about the house, then why did the bathtub scene ever happen? When did he first learn about the house? Surely it was before, or why was he getting so close to someone he hated? Did he hate Felix right away? Why? If he only started hating Felix after he was exposed and rejected, then why did the grave scene happen? If he always craved social acceptance, then why would killing the family and getting the house to hang out in alone be the solution? None of this really fits together. So, what could have been done differently to fix the holes in this story? Well, as I've mentioned, the first step is backstory. Oliver needs to have a clear character history that helps to justify his extreme actions. You can still have the meet the parents scene, but you just can't have your cake and eat it in the same way, which means you probably need to kill the darling of having Felix present for this revelation. It's my favourite moment, but here's how it could have been done differently so that the audience can accept the major shift from Oliver just being in love with Felix to Oliver only ever being obsessed with obtaining the house. In the original, Felix was upset that Oliver hooked up with his sister Venetia. It's a bit out of character, but it bothers him. Oliver then lies, claiming he rejected her advances and that Farley was lying about what he saw, and Felix believes him. But instead, what if Felix followed these feelings of betrayal and was so upset that he asked Oliver to leave the castle? The audience can now follow Oliver on his trip home alone, expecting to see squalor and tragedy, and instead witnessing a nice normal family life. This makes us realise he's been lying, but Felix remains none the wiser. We see Oliver's childhood bedroom where there's a framed photograph of Saltburn, and through having dinner with his parents, we learn the real backstory, that his grandfather used to work on the grounds and died of a heart attack while scrubbing the floors after one of their many wild summer parties, and the family never paid out the money for overworking him. This would feed into the earlier moment when Felix told Farley they have a big turnover of footmen on the land. But it doesn't even need to be his grandfather. It could be his father or something completely different. It could be that he's somehow blood related to Felix's family and his mother was cast out after working on the grounds. Or his sibling was drunkenly killed in a car accident by the mother and they got away with it with no remorse. You can come up with your own options here. The point is it has to be something that has deep emotional presence in Oliver that drives his need for revenge. Once we establish this, instead of throwing it in at the end, now it's revealed that Oliver was the one to burst Felix's tire to start their relationship. And this would allow the audience to reframe all his behaviour up until this point. He then gets a call from Felix to tell him that he was only joking about Venetia. All his friends hook up with her, it's practically a rite of passage. But he wanted him out of the house so they could plan his secret birthday party that's about to start. This would further establish that Felix treats Oliver like a toy he can chuck away and bring back, even if he's trying to be nice. So now when Oliver returns to Saltburn for a gruesome Tarantino-style revenge story, he has the audience on his side. And rather than concealing all of his crimes and shrouding them in mystery, the viewer gets to experience the complex obstacles of wiping out each family member along the way. As that's the next hole that really needs to be plugged. One of the biggest problems in the last 20 minutes of Saltburn is the sheer speed and implausibility of it all. Everything Oliver does is far too easy for him to pull off and far too unlikely to ever work out. His plan is straight up flimsy, so much of it is left up to chance. Like, would the coroner really not have discovered that Felix was poisoned? What if Venetia and the father didn't conveniently take their own lives? Is that game over? And are we really to believe that he was waiting around for years in the hopes that the father would take himself out so that he can run into the mother in a cafe? Not to mention the tax complications of inheriting a castle and the fact that other actual family members would obviously have a major claim to such an expensive piece of property. So if the first quarter is spent in school, we should be shown Oliver studying psychology, law, maybe even medicine, so that there's proof he has the right education to pull off something so morbid. And the second quarter is spent living in Saltburn, understanding each family member's personal weakness, then the last 2 quarters should be dedicated to gradually taking out each family member in inventive and intelligent ways, where we see everything we set up in the first quarter paying off, with Oliver nearly getting caught along the way and overcoming the odds until he has to take out his final favourite family member. That way, the tension, conflict and sacrifices are rising in scale, rather than starting with the biggest sacrifice and then cramming in the other few for a rushed dessert. The result of all of this would really make the final scene with Murder on the Dance Floor playing feel earned, instead of just throwing it in as a fun piece of exposition to end with. There are so many things you could move around to make the order of the murders more logical. For instance, as an alternative option, rather than Felix or Oliver uncovering the truth, how about Farley does? Similar to the original, Farley gets kicked out of Saltburn after Oliver frames him for stealing, causing him to go on a bitter investigation, visits the family home, and gets told the haunting backstory after spotting the framed photo on the wall. Then when Farley sneaks back into the birthday party that night to expose his rival, Oliver murders him before he gets a chance to speak. This would make the most sense, as he would originally have to kill to prevent the information from getting out at all. Instead of the original, where we have all the fun and stakes of Felix finding out, but then instead of maximizing the consequences of that moment, Felix randomly lets the party go ahead, and says he won't tell his family because it's dark enough as it is, despite the fact that that's wholly inconsistent with the gossipy nature of the family. After killing Farley, then Oliver could target Venetia, then the father, and so on, taking out those that are the greatest threats to him one by one, rather than starting with his greatest ally and clunkily somehow worming his way back in. Which leads into the next fix, developing Oliver's relationships with each family member. In order for him to execute what should be a very complicated plan, Oliver would need to have an insightful, intimate, and unique connection with each character. So rather than wasting his time hitting on Farley, who never even liked him, those scenes should have been spent developing a secret affair with the father or mother, maybe both. If Oliver was playing marriage counselor to both of them as their marriage circles the drain, it would demonstrate that he has insider knowledge of how they both work psychologically, which would make any plans he employs far more believable. As in the original, Oliver doesn't know the father well enough to trust he'll ever take himself out, and his relationship with the mother is a bit undercooked. He calls her beautiful once and she visibly likes it, but they should have had more scenes together so that when they connect down the line, there's truly unfinished business there to justify the relationship. And the final fix is cementing the theme. Saltburn is an eat the rich story. It depicts wealthy people as selfish, uncaring, and empty. Their lives are easy, therefore they deserve anything bad that happens to them. But I don't think you could really say Felix is a bad person. Sure, he's privileged, somewhat selfish and oblivious, but he does welcome Oliver into his life. He covers for him by paying for the round of drinks, vaguely stands up for him to his snobby friends, spends hours with him listening to his fake sob stories, and tries to help him rekindle his relationship with his mother. Overall, he's actually a good friend. Although there is an underlying suspicion that Felix only likes keeping Oliver around to make him feel good about helping the less fortunate, in order to justify killing him, he would need to have truly betrayed Oliver in some way, or been overheard saying something unforgivable, like admitting Oliver is just his little pet project he'll soon throw away, or perhaps even a joke or a bet. Additionally, for a movie about wealth disparity, there's very little focus on the individuals that actually work on the premises. If Oliver was balancing his time more by not just seducing the family, but also befriending the staff and seeing the humble lives they're forced to lead, then it would be easier to villainize the family and cheer on their demise. This way, when Oliver takes them all out and celebrates by having the house at the end, he would now have the staff members as his new community to dance and party with, which would validate the social acceptance he was seeking in the beginning and make it all come full circle. Instead of just being alone with a big house, which, given his lack of motivation, doesn't really say anything of substance whatsoever. Saltburn was one of the most talked about and frustrating movies of 2023, as it has all of the ingredients to make an instant classic and seems as if it's on track to pull it off, only to undermine itself with a muddled and rushed second half due to the underdevelopment of the lead character and the flimsiness of his strategy. But what do you think? Is Saltburn perfect the way it is? Or do you see some of the same problems, and either agree with my solutions or have some ideas of your own? Let me know in the comment section.